Yo guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel, or welcome if you've never been here before. I hope you guys have all had a good Christmas and a good New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, and I hope you guys are all ready for the new trading year in 2022. So I've just jumped on today to do my pre-market forecast for the week commencing the 3rd of January until the 7th of January, Friday. And I'm going to be doing V6 pairs as usual. But before I get started with the actual analysis, I just want to highlight that I do a written version of this forecast every week, and I share the link for that forecast in the video description. So if you guys are interested in checking out this forecast, which articulates pretty much what I'm going to be saying in this video, but in a written format, then please click the link in the video description and you guys can then see that and do whatever you want with the written version of this forecast. So without further ado, I'll get on with the video forecast now. Alright, so let's start off with Nzdusd this week. Alright, so Nzdusd, the last couple of weeks I've been looking at, firstly we had this bearish breaker structure on the daily, and then that was followed by a second bearish break structure on the daily. So based on that, I was looking at a bearish bias coming out of that most recent daily point of interest. And if you go and check my forecast from last week, you'll see I was actually looking at an 8-hour point of interest up here, and then I was looking to sell out of this area. Now, what we can see is that that sell thesis didn't play out, and like I mentioned last week, with the way that AU was looking last week, it did seem pretty unlikely that the sell thesis would play out, even though in theory it looked pretty clean on NU. But yeah, so now we've seen that breaker structure to the high, which is a breaker structure on the 8-hour, and it's a breaker structure on the daily. So following that breaker structure to the high, that essentially gives us our bullish intent. So with that, we know that going into this week, we're probably going to be looking for buys to basically take price higher up. So before I get into the points of interest, the order blocks, I just want to talk about this order block up here. So on the daily, we had that previous break structure to the low, and then the second break structure. Now, the second break structure, the order block that it left behind was kind of insignificant. Like, it didn't really do much compared with this one up here. This one up here, it's clearly grabbed liquidity before a very impulsive sell move, and we've got imbalance. So to me, it makes a lot of sense for price to come back up to this order block. So considering that, and then looking at current price action, we've got a good reason for price to come up higher, and hopefully we can see it coming up to mitigate this order block, and then we can see what happens. So from where we're at right now, that's 140 pips. So we've got a decent range to play with next week and possibly the week after, looking at buys. And in terms of that order block there as well, it does line up with the AUD USD order block. So I do think that we've got a pretty good chance of NZD USD coming up into this order block before it then potentially sells off. Alright, so let's get into the actual opportunities for this week. So we've had our break structure to the high, so we know that we're looking to now follow this bullish market structure to basically take us up to this order block up here. So it's really a question of where do we buy from. So looking from a daily perspective, our current range is from the high here to the low down here. So in that sense, it makes perfect sense for price to come down to this daily extreme here, and I've drawn on a refined version of the daily POI, which is the 8-hour refinement of the daily POI, and then we can see price go up from there after it takes out over liquidity below these areas, mitigates the order block, which causes the overall daily push to the high, and then we can see price move up to then mitigate this higher time frame order block here. So if we do see that, I think it makes sense for us to look for buys from this refined daily point of interest at the low down here. However, what I am aware of is we've got this move here, these sell candles, before the actual push which broke structure. So for me, I think we've got two POIs. We've got our extreme daily POI, and then we've also got this area here. So let's jump down to the lower time frames and take a look at this. Alright, so looking at the 8 hour, which is what I was mainly focused on with my analysis on Nzdusd for the last couple of weeks, we broke structure here, and that structural break has clearly come from this low down here. Now, for me, looking at the 4 hour, what we can also see is that that was essentially the previous break of structure to the current break of structure on the 4 hour. And this point of interest here, which is your 8 hour point of interest, also has imbalance on the 4 hour. So looking at that imbalance there, it really makes sense for price to come down here at least before then continuing upwards. So what I'll be anticipating on Nzdusd at the start of a week will come out. At the start of a week we'll come down to take this liquidity below these equal lows here, and then we'll tap into this 8 hour order block. And then when we get into that 8 hour order block, I personally think that we're most likely going to see buys coming up to then take us higher, to then break structure again on the 8 hour. And hopefully we can then take price up to this daily order block for sells. So if we do go from there, we could see a pretty big move coming out of this 8 hour order block to take us up there. Now, if that order block's not respected and we see price just violate through this order block, then I'll be looking at the refined daily POI for the next buying opportunity. So yeah, for me, I really do think that this 8 hour point of interest is going to be the best point of interest going into the start of next week, and that's where I'll be expecting price to buy away from to then go higher. But if we do violate that, then I'll still be expecting a bullish thesis based on this break structure, and I'll expect that thesis to come from this daily POI if this POI here is invalidated. So that's pretty much Nzdusd for me. I'm really only interested in buys. Now we've seen this break structure, and I'm going to be looking for buys out of this area and out of this area. Of course, if you're looking at the lower time frames, try and do intraday, there will be some potential sell opportunities as we retrace back into these POIs. But in terms of the better opportunities, I really think buys are the best opportunities on Nzdusd this week. So that's Nzdusd. So let's go over to AU. Alright, so starting from the daily on AU, it's literally the same as it has been for like the last 3-4 weeks. We've got this break structure, we've got our point of interest which we're retracing up to, and what we're seeing is we're just seeing this retracement that I've been talking about for the last couple of weeks continuing now, and price is taking us up to this daily point of interest for sells. So when we get into this daily POI, I'm expecting that the sells are going to start coming in, and then hopefully we can see that next impulsive leg on the daily to then take us to break structure again on the daily. So in terms of the daily time frame, that's what I'm looking at, taking sells out of this daily point of interest to target the low. However, that said, we do still have, to be fair, it's only 50 pips, so it's not a huge range, but we've still got room to work with on the way up there, and also we're pretty likely to be coming up to this area now, so I think it makes sense to predict these short-term buying opportunities on the way up. Alright, so looking at the lower time frames, so I did my analysis earlier when I created the written version, and I went through these different hour time frames, and for me in this circumstances the 5 hour is the cleanest, just because of the way the market structure is on the 5 hour. So let's break this down. Alright, so on the 5 hour we've got a break structure here, and then that left behind this point of interest. That point of interest got mitigated by this price action here, and then we saw another break of structure here. So because we've seen basically a break of structure, mitigation, break of structure, that leaves us with a high probability point of interest, which also has an order flow invalidation line. So for me, I think that we're just going to be seeing a continuation of this bullish order flow on the 5 hour, and that's what I'm going to be looking at going into the start of the week. So we do actually have another break on the 5 hour, but the thing about this is that the actual order block that calls for break, it's not really that clean. There's no imbalance, and what we've also got, which is clear on the lower time frames, is we've got a lot of equal lows here, which to me means that there's liquidity built up there. So considering that we've got liquidity here and the order flow invalidation line is here, and then we've got this unmitigated point of interest with imbalance, for me this is where price is going to go from. So going into the week, next week, I'm going to be looking at buys out of this area, and then hopefully we can take price up to the daily point of interest, and then we can see what happens there. But for me, when we do get up there, I'm going to be anticipating sells, and considering all this imbalance here, it really does make sense for sells to come out of a daily point of interest. So yeah, this is just a shorter term opportunity until we do get up to this daily point of interest. So that's it really for Australian dollar, US dollar. So on the daily, we're just anticipating this retracement up to a point of interest, and then we can look to sell away from a point of interest. And then in terms of what's happening with this retracement, on the 5 hour, we've got clear bullish order flow. So I'll just be looking to continue the bullish order flow on the 5 hour until we do reach that higher time frame point of interest for sells. So that's AUD USD this week. So let's take a look at the euro dollar. Alright, so euro dollar, the last few weeks I was looking at this point of interest for sells on the daily, and at this point now that's been broken. So we've now had break structure to the high on the daily, which essentially signals bullish intent. Alright guys, so sorry about that. So guys, we've got a break of structure to the high on the daily. Now looking at the current daily range, it's basically between this high here and then the low down here. So it makes sense for price to really retrace anywhere in this area down to this area down here before we then travel upwards away from there. So what I'm anticipating on euro dollar is some type of retracement now, potentially as far as to the daily low before we then break structure to the high, and that will essentially fill all this imbalance, and then we can see what happens when we get to this daily impulsive order block up here. So for what I'm really seeing, I'm going to expect a pullback into this daily order block, and then we'll see price buying up, fill all this imbalance, come up here to mitigate this impulsive order block, and then we'll continue lower to take out all this liquidity which is formed at the low here. So in the longer term thesis, that's what I'm really looking at on the euro dollar, and I'll go back to my actual markup in a minute, and you'll see that's why the thesis invalidation line is down there. So let's just go back to my markup. Alright guys, so I've got my markup back now. So looking at the lower time frames now, what we're seeing is that the 4 hour bullish thesis, which I've been talking about for I think the last couple of weeks, has actually continued to play out as I planned it. So we got the first break of structure, that came to mitigate down here. Then we saw the second break of structure. We then got the mitigation again, respecting the order flow invalidation line, and we've now had that third break of structure. So considering that on the daily, like I said, we could go anywhere within this whole range, it's valid for us to come all the way down here to this thesis invalidation line and come off this POI here. But looking at the 4 hour, what we've actually got is an order flow invalidation line and a clear point of interest. So we've had a break of structure, we've had mitigation there, which we then had mitigation there, which essentially leaves the order flow invalidation line here. Now this third break of structure is directly caused by this sell here, which is a sell to buy. So that's why for me on euro dollar, I'm going to be looking at price coming back down here and then buying up away from there. So hopefully, and I think the highest probability on euro dollar is just going to be the continuation of this 4-hour bullish order flow, and that's just going to be a buy away from this order block here. But if we do see that validated, the overall buy thesis based on that break structure on the daily is still going to be valid unless we see a daily close below this thesis invalidation line. But yeah, hopefully we can just continue away from the order flow invalidation line on the 4-hour and then take price hopefully all the way to this daily impulsive order block, which is going to be over 200 pips away at that point. So the reason why I think it's going to go all the way up there is because we've just got imbalance here and we've got imbalance here. So to make the market efficient again, and from an institutional perspective, it really makes sense for them to just bring price back up here, fill all the imbalance, take the liquidity out below these highs, then mitigate up here in this order block before then finally reversing and continuing down. So that's what I'm looking for on euro dollar. Basically buys out of the 4-hour order block, and failing that, buys out of the daily order block. So let's see what we get on euro dollar this week. Alright, so pound dollar. So pound dollar, I've been looking at this POI for buys for a while now. For sales, sorry, for a while. But then we've seen this POI violated last week and we've actually had a break above it. So that thesis of selling away from here is now invalidated. Now, what we've still got is we've got this impulsive order block here, so the order block which calls for previous break before the break structure for the POI I've been predicting the last couple of weeks, and that does actually have imbalance on it. So in that sense, it does make perfect sense for price to come up here and then start to sell off. So even though we have violated this POI for sells, we've still got this area of supply here, which is also a POI for sells, and we could see price coming out of there. So just from a daily perspective, we've still got this supply area, which is essentially a very valid supply area in the market. Now, looking at the actual current breaker structure on the daily, so we've had our breaker structure to the high, which violated that POI from last week. Where has that originated from? It's originated from this candle down here, which is a sell to buy, and that's got imbalance. So looking at that, just from a daily perspective, ignoring this, it makes sense for a price to retrace, potentially back down nearly 300 pips, to then mitigate this before, if it would potentially continue upwards, before continuing upwards. So what I think is a reasonable possibility on the daily is that we're going to travel up into this area here, which is a daily supply area. We're then going to start to see price reverse, and we'll see that bearish order flow coming into the market, and then we will come down here and then potentially continue higher if they want to take it higher. But let's see what happens with that. I mean, really, we could just continue going through this, and it could just continue with the lower time frame structure. But I do think we've got this clear order block here for buys, so it does make sense for us to see that overall bearish move back down here. But let's have a look at the lower time frames now and see what's actually happening in terms of this whole bullish situation here. Alright, so ignore these two for now. We've got this break of structure here, which is the 8-hour break of structure, and that's caused this whole move here, and that actually mitigated pretty much this order block here. So in terms of the 8-hour, we do have an 8-hour order flow invalidation here, and looking at that, I think it makes sense for price to come down here into this 8-hour order block and then continue higher. And I think that that makes sense even in the thesis where we do sell out of this area. Hopefully what we could see is price coming down into here before then a reaction, and then we can see it buying up to target this daily area here. Now, what we've also got looking at the 5 hour is a slightly higher point of interest and a slightly higher order flow invalidation line. So it might look a bit confused, but it's just because each time frame has its own respective structure and order flow invalidation line. So in this situation, we do have two opportunities, and this opportunity here is essentially based on the 5 hour order block, which calls this most recent breaker structure, and this here is based on the 8 hour. So in terms of what I'm looking at this week on GU, at the start of a week, I'll be probably expecting a retrace, really. Even if we go a bit higher, I'll still be expecting this retrace to come into the market. And then when we reach this 5 hour point of interest, I'll be looking for a potential reaction for buys. And if I start to see that on the low time frames, I'll be more than happy to take buys out of there. If this is violated, then I'll be looking at following the 8 hour structure to then essentially buy out of here and then take price higher out of here to break structure again on the 8 hour. Now, following that, when we do get up into this area, I'm definitely going to be aware that it's a valid area of supply, but I will still be following the hourly structures and seeing what happens with the hourly structures, not getting too concerned with that area of supply. But I mean, yeah, for me, I think we're going to retrace into either the 5 hour or the 8 hour point of interest. We'll then see the buys coming up out of there before we then see some type of sell move coming away from this daily supply area. And whether or not that sell move is going to take us, the full 300 pips back down to the other daily order block, I'm not really sure. But in terms of the rules that I analyze the market with, that definitely makes sense. So yeah, let's see what happens with GU this coming week. And guys, if you enjoy these forecasts, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel, because it does take time each week to prepare these forecasts, and especially to put the written analysis together. So if you guys enjoy it, then please do subscribe to the channel. Also, please do check out the written version of these analyses, as the written version does cover pretty much everything that I talk about, and sometimes it even covers it in more detail. So it's definitely worth checking out the written version of the forecast if you're interested in that. Alright, so Euro Pound and Pound Yen. There's not really as much going on with these pairs right now. So Euro Pound, the last couple of weeks I've been talking about this 2-day order block up here. We saw the liquidity grab above it, and then I've been targeting price to come down to the low. What we've seen is that move pretty much exactly like I predicted it. It's played out for nearly just over 200 pips from the high, and we have now reached that 2-day target. Now, the thing is, for me, I need a body close below here before I actually call it a breaker structure. So for me, there's not been that breaker structure to the low yet. So right now it's really in no man's land, and it's just a case of waiting for this breaker structure to come through. So as of now, there's not really anything on Euro Pound for me that I'm predicting at this moment. But looking at the actual price action, what I'm going to anticipate is we're going to see that breaker structure coming in. So we'll see the breaker structure coming in. That will then be a breaker structure when we get that body close below. And if we do get that, then that will validate this candle here as a valid order block for sells. So if we do get that breaker structure, and if it happens, say, on Monday, then after that, I'll be looking for sells out of these areas up here. So if we do get that breaker structure there, then I'll be looking to sell out of this overall candle. But then just looking at the 4 hour, the 6 hours clearer, sorry guys. So just looking at the 6 hour, within that overall area, there's really two clear areas where I'd expect price to come out of. So the first one is this candle here, which caused this impulsive nature, and that's got a clear imbalance, and it also gets liquidity above the previous candle. So I think that's a pretty high confidence refinement of this overall area. But failing that, I'd expect price to retrace quite a bit deeper towards the extreme, maybe even coming up into this wick trick to take out imbalance before then following through with the bearish thesis to take out the liquidity on the weekly, which I've been speaking about for the last few weeks. So yeah, Euro Pound, we're definitely still bearish, and hopefully we'll see that break of structure to the low, and then we can have this order block validated and then look for sells away from that order block. But right now there's no real clear opportunities, so this might be an opportunity for next week most likely, considering where we are currently on the daily. So finally, let's look at pound yen. So pound yen on the daily, what we had was a break structure to the low, and I was looking at sells out of this point of interest here. Now, what's actually happened is we've just continued the move from the 8-hour order block that I spoke about a couple of weeks ago, and that move away from that 8-hour order block has just smashed through the daily point of interest for sells. So at this point, that bearish bias is pretty much invalidated, and now I'm definitely looking for buys on the pound yen. So looking at that, it's really just a case of where to buy from, and I'll go lower in a minute, but really we don't need to go lower than the daily time frame here. There's 3 areas for me which we could potentially see this continuation buy coming from. So it's either going to come from this base here, which caused the break structure directly, this base here, which is another sell to buy, which has imbalance, or it'll come from the extreme down here. Now, in terms of which one is most valid, then the extreme is the actual low. So if price, it wouldn't be surprising to see price violate these two and then come down to the extreme. But if we're being realistic, the extreme POI is 500 pips away. So if price is in an aggressive up move, a retracement for 500 pips when we've already seen all this retracing down here does seem pretty unlikely. And that's why I'm more interested in these daily bases. So just looking at the lower time frames, so the 6-hour, what we can see, so we've literally had this break structure here. So we got a break structure, and that was caused by this order block, which is the lower of the 2 daily bases that I've shown. And then we've got this order block here, which is the order block that caused the most recent break structure, and that is the higher of the 2 daily bases that I've shown. So yeah, really, I'm just going to be watching on pound yen as price comes into this area. If we start to see that buy continuation coming in, then I'll be happy to trade out of there. Likewise, if we do violate this higher one, then I'll be looking for a buy continuation out of this lower order block. And if both of these get violated, which like I say, I really think that the price will react off one of these higher order blocks. But if they do both get violated, then the next place to buy from is still going to be down here. So, I mean, if we see the second one violated, then we might see some shorter term selling opportunities in terms of this area here, because if that does get violated, we're talking like 200 pips. But yeah, when we do get down there, based on the daily, I'm still going to be looking for buys. But for me, like I say, I think that we're going to react for buys off one of these 2 order blocks up here. So we'll just have to see what happens this week on pound yen and see which order blocks get respected. So guys, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I'm sorry if there's been a bit of background noise in this one. There's a few people in my house, so not really much I can do about that. I apologise for that, guys. But I will try to edit out any background noise as best as possible. So thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, and I hope you guys all have a safe and profitable trading week. Cheers, guys.